structure of the panel. We have China, we have Indonesia, very important country from the ASEAN, we have Russia, we have Bahrain, a very important and vibrant GCC country, and then we have South Africa, which is a founding member of the BRICS. And still some people would say Vladimir Putin is isolated. So I don't know if this panel says something, it says how multipolar the world has become. Mr. President, the floor is yours for the first speech.
Excellency, Mr. Prabowo Subianto, Your Highness, Sheikh Nasser, Excellency, Mr. Ding Shushang, Excellency, Mr. Paul Mashatile, ladies, gentlemen, friends, I welcome all the participants and guests of the 28th St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Traditionally, it is a platform for substantive, meaningful discussions on the most relevant subjects of this day, and we are glad that these discussions in the forum platforms are attended by representatives of 140 countries and territories. This year, the themes discussed here, and all of them are important, or rather, as colleagues call them, discussion tracks, include the quality of growth in a multipolar world and great challenges. And these challenges include tectonic shifts in global economics and demographics, including the dynamics of the world's population. They also include social, societal, and geopolitical controversies that manifest themselves through crises and regional conflicts that are flaring up anew with greater force. Unfortunately, this is something we are witnessing currently in the Middle East. Finally, these challenges include climate change and acute environmental issues that require a response, as well as a transition to a new technological structure, which is founded upon digital platforms, AI, and autonomous systems that are capable of making decisions without the participation of human beings. The thing is, how do we make sure that these positive technological changes are spread ubiquitously? How do we make sure that these new digital technological solutions are universally acceptable, allowing countries, regions, and cities achieve a new level of development, climbing the ladder of progress, making sure that this technological breakthrough benefits everyone, including in terms of changing societal structure, decreasing level in inequality, as well as higher standards of living? How do we make sure every person has equal opportunities and gets access to knowledge that will help tap into their potential? And how do we implement the fundamental principle of justice? In the course of my address, I would like to dwell on the tasks at hand for Russia. I'll also speak about what we're doing to address these tasks together with the business community, the academia, and civil society. I'll speak about the approaches we propose in order to support economic growth, not just within our country, but also how we create joint mechanisms for global and regional development in partnership with friendly nations. Let me start with an overview of the current state of the Russian economy. Despite a challenging external environment, the Russian GDP over the last 2 years has been growing by more than 4% every year. In other words, that was higher than average across the world. Speaking about the structure of this growth, let me cite a specific criterion indicator which we have dubbed non-oil and gas GDP. It's calculated so as to factor out the influence of industries related to the extraction of hydrocarbons. So this non-oil and gas GDP in Russia in 2023 grew by 7.2%, whereas in 2024 it grew by almost 5%, namely 4.9%. In other words, we see a higher growth rate than across our GDP on average. In other words, the contribution of the commodity-related component into the economic dynamics of our country is no longer defining. Moreover, at the current point in time, it is showing negative dynamics. And by far, the defense industry is not the only thing sustaining the general growth of GDP, despite what some claim. Yes, indeed, the defense industry has played a role, but we have to look at the structure in detail. Over the last 2 years, we see growth in agriculture, industry in general, construction, logistics, services, finance, as well as IT. In other words, almost all key, systemically important industries of the Russian economy have been growing. What does it tell us? It tells us that thanks to the efforts of dozens of thousands of companies and enterprises, their teams, managers, thanks to the initiatives and efforts of millions of entrepreneurs, our economy is not simply growing steadily. Rather, it is also gaining in quality, complexity, as well as diversity. The idea of a Russian economy being completely commodity-based and dependent on the exports of hydrocarbons is evidently outdated. It's becoming a thing of the past. Reality tells us a different picture. Russia ranks 4th in the world in terms of the GDP size, and it's the first economy in Europe. And it's, of course, not GDP per capita. This is just the general GDP size. And it is a very important indicator. But it's not enough to achieve this position. It's important to reaffirm it all the time, reaffirm the status of one of the biggest economies. We need to create a conducive environment to make sure that the businesses, both from Russia and from friendly nations, keeps investing resources, modernizing and expanding its production capacities in Russia. Our current task is to make sure our economy is on a trend of balanced growth. This balanced growth implies moderate inflation as well as low unemployment rate. The statistics tells us that yearly inflation rate has decreased to single digits. Right now it's less than 10%. As of June the 16th, it stood at 9.6%. Certainly, a lot still needs to be done, but we keep on targeting the inflation rate. Of course, this is largely thanks to the active efforts by the government in terms of developing supply-side economics, but also the actions of the central bank. At the same time, the inflationary dynamics is better than anticipated by many experts, even better than the forecast by the Bank of Russia, which is something that has allowed us to proceed to a careful loosening of the monetary policy. But the changes in consumer prices doesn't tell us the full picture. I would like to reiterate, a well-balanced growth implies not just moderate inflation, but low unemployment rate, as well as a positive economic dynamics. And we need to follow all the indicators telling us how our industries, companies and firms are feeling. A couple of words about the labor markets. There's something I'm gonna get back to later, but I would like to say that the first 4 months of this year saw a GDP growth by 1.5% year on year. In April, the growth picked up to 1.9%, and yet some specialists and experts point out the risks of stagnation and even recession, and this is something we have to avoid at all costs. I know that at this forum, you've listened to the discussions that are currently ongoing within the government. There is a discussion between the Central Bank of Russia on the one hand and the government on the other. And, of course, you are well versed in the facts. What we need is to pursue a well-informed, careful, fiscal and monetary policy. We need to make sure that our mechanisms are fine-tuned in order to support and stimulate growth. We need to ensure macroeconomic, inflationary and financial stability. In other words, our strategic task is to be active and steady and consistent in changing the structure of the Russian economy, and we've made great headway in that regard. But it is of paramount importance to keep advancing given the drastic changes across the world. The importance of additional measures to those ends That is something we discussed during the session of the Council on Strategic Development and National Projects back in December last year. The government, regions, the business, expert community and academia have to work together to improve the long-term economic growth and achieve structural changes in the economy. Let me dwell a little bit on these key aspects we need to address today. First and foremost, we need to change the nature of employment and consumption patterns. We have to create an environment which will stimulate economic activity among our citizens, to make sure that our young people and senior citizens can fully tap into their potential in the labor market so that they can get new competencies, build a successful career, and improve their income. In other words, I'm referring to a transition to an economy of high wages based not on a shortage of labor force, when entrepreneurs have to resort to raising wages so as to vie and compete for workers. Rather, these high wages have to be based on the quality of jobs as well as higher labor productivity. Over the last 4 years, employment in Russia grew by 2,400,000 people. Starting from October last year, across the country, we stabilized the unemployment rate at around 2.3%. We managed to achieve a record low of unemployment rate. We are also witnessing positive dynamics in those Russian regions that traditionally have been facing acute problems in employment. I refer, as colleagues know, mostly to the south of Russia. And right now, we see the unemployment over there half or so. This is thanks to well-informed, stimulating macroeconomic policies as well as active efforts by the regional authorities with the support of federal employment programs. It is also important to integrate up-to-date and cutting-edge technological solutions such as platform-based employment and digital marketplaces. Our colleague from Bahrain has told me that he's just been to the Chechen Republic, and with his own eyes he witnessed the republic's development. The Chechen Republic is a good example in that regard. I would also like to point out that youth employment is growing. I mean, those young people who are simply entering into the labor market, trying to secure their first job. In terms of youth unemployment, Russia is one of the world's top performers because we have an unemployment rate among the young people at around 7.5%, whereas, just to cite an example, France and the UK are facing the unemployment rates of 16% and 11% respectively. Generally speaking, youth unemployment is a most acute economic and social issue across the modern world. But as we can see, Russia is more or less successful in addressing this problem. We are following the right path and we are coping with it. Of course, there is room for improvement, but I would like to underscore that progress in that field is undeniable. And active youth employment yields results not just in the short term, because a good start, being a highly sought-after specialist in the labor market, this is something that sets the stage for later professional career of a young person and their place in society. It has an influence on their desire to make a family, take care of their parents, raise children, not just the firstborn, but fortunately the second or the third and other children. And of course, this helps address social, economic and demographic development of the country. Moving on, our employment is growing in the industries that create great added value and end products such as high-tech, and I also refer manufacturing in IT, tourism, whereas employment in supporting industries such as public administration, trade and finance sees a decrease in employment there. And this is an objective fact and it's well grounded. Maybe not everyone knows that, but this is a very good trend that the employment there is decreasing. Just for your information, if we look at the dynamics in information and communication, we see an increase of almost 30% by 350,000 people. We see a 10.2% growth in manufacturing industry, whereas the number of workers in trade has decreased by 170,000 people, which is minus 3%. These are gradual yet very significant trends that reflect the structural and quality changes. We intend to keep working through increasing the efficiency of our economy and introducing digital platform-based decisions and solutions to make sure that we decrease employment in the so-called supporting industries, but we have to provide those who are employed there with an alternative. And to that end, we will stimulate the creation of better, more attractive jobs with higher labor productivity that satisfy the new technological structure. And of course, for the benefit of our people, we have to fine-tune the labor legislation. The government has drafted a package of such amendments. I would like to ask the State Duma to adopt those amendments swiftly. I would like to reiterate that high-quality, structurally sound employment holds the key to improving income of citizens and families and decreasing inequality. Of course, inequality is still a problem, but we are making good headway in addressing that. We have already managed to do a lot to raise the income of the most vulnerable citizens. And on a particular note, I would like to say that we've managed to achieve a record decrease of poverty, because as of the end of last year, poverty level stood at 7.2%, and the positive dynamics is still very much in effect. And the first quarter of this year has seen a decrease of more than 2 million people, of those who earn less than the minimum wages. This august assembly knows that, but I would like to say that in 2000, the poverty level in Russia stood at 29%. This is for information of our guests. And unfortunately, 42.3 million people lived in these undignified conditions. In 2024, this level is just 7.2%, and it's just 10.5 million people. But this is not the end of our journey. We need to make sure that this figure goes down. We first have the task of decreasing it to 7% and then to 5%. But if we look at the economy in general, we see that the level of wages across Russia is still not sufficient. It's not adequate, and we need to be ambitious. We have to build an economy of high salaries, of high wages. It's of the utmost importance. This has to be based on higher labor productivity. Incidentally, the share of wages in the GDP increased from 40.7% to almost 44% in 2024, so in 3 years. What are we concentrating our efforts on? First and foremost, we are adapting education programs to the needs of the real sector. Incidentally, the youth unemployment dynamics I've just mentioned demonstrates that we are moving in the right direction. I would also like to add that this year, in the run-up to our forum, we have published a ranking of education institutions of Russia based on the quality of their jobs, employment, as well as wages. It shows us what professions are in greatest demand, what education institutions give their graduates the best education that the economy needs. This ranking shows the efficiency of management teams of these education institutions, and I would like to ask the heads of relevant ministries and colleagues, both at the federal and regional level, to pay close attention to that ranking, using it as an instrument for managing changes in professional education. Moving on, with a view to raising the income of our citizens, we need to raise their qualifications and retrain them to provide them with an opportunity to grow professionally, to move to other companies and even to other regions. In other words, we need to increase the mobility of labor force, which is of the utmost importance to the economy. It gives people a chance to occupy better, more promising positions with better conditions and terms and better wages. We also need to invest in new equipment, automate and integrate robots in manufacturing capacities, and they have to be serviced as well. And this will require professional, highly competent and highly paid employees. But raising income is important not just for individuals and families, but also for the economy in general, because a rise in income and a decrease in inequality entail a change in the demand structure, because this demand structure becomes more balanced. It stimulates the consumption of domestically produced services and goods. I refer to tourist industry, catering industry, these and also industries that capitalize on our natural reaches, improving the potential of our cities and settlements, making them more comfortable for life and for leisure and for work. And I would like to remind you that together with the government, we decided to introduce a new taxation system for the catering industry with a fixed VAT rate. Part of the revenue will be funneled into the municipal authorities, providing them with an additional resource for projects and development programs on the ground. First and foremost, to raise the standards of life. We're certainly going to support creative economy related to science, culture, art, and creativity, including such avenues as architecture, design, cinema, music, publishing, software, and so on and so forth. That's everything that the experts have dubbed the experience economy. This year, we have seen the entry into force of a federal law that has provided the legal framework for promoting creative industries. Until the end of the year, 70 regions are going to start introducing the standards for the development of this modern segment of economy as well as social life, creating the requisite infrastructure. To make sure this work is put on a systemic basis, I would like to ask the government, together with the Russian regions, to draft a long-term strategy for the development of creative economy, and also think and consider launching a federal project.
On a separate note, I would like to speak about raising the tourist attraction of Russian towns and villages, a visible manifestation of our national identity. And true points of tourist attraction are ancient buildings, churches or estates, the cultural heritage sites. We have agreed that by 2030, we renovate no less than 1,000 such sites all across our country to give them a second life, including by means of opening museums, educational and exposition centers, hotels, and so on. The pilot program to restore cultural heritage sites with concessional funding for such projects has already covered 9 regions of Russia. The current goal is to extend it to other constituent entities of Russia. To make sure that allocated funds produce a better result, I suggest the following solutions. We could unite the resources of 2 concessional lending programs for creating tourist infrastructure and preserving the cultural heritage sites. Thus, the renovation and overhaul of ancient buildings for the business purposes in particular could be additionally funded from the loans that reduce trade. Apart from that, I